This month's Q&A video is from a question from one of my Patreon members called Sarah, who asked me how to choose the right colours for a blurry background. And how do you ensure that the colour application is soft and not precise? Well, so that's what I'm going to show you today on how to create a blurry background and also the way that I tend to choose my colours for that particular subject that the background is needed for. So let's get the brushes wet and let's get started. The unseen power of a blurry background. Have you ever wondered why some paintings just pop off the page? Well, not literally, but you know what I mean. It's often about what you don't see clearly. So, for example, when you're looking at this one of the Golden Eagle, you find that the blurry background I'm using here is quite intense, quite dramatic in a way. Even though it's green, I made sure that the background on one side at least is painted at an angle. And that gives you more like a focus, doesn't it? Sort of bringing the viewer's eyes into that picture. The reason why I chose the greens for the background, because that's the sort of area that this bird would live in. Whereas if you choose something like the Northern Cardinal, like this one here, the background looks okay, but it's not what you'd normally see in nature. Yes, you get those motes sort of flying around in the atmosphere, I know. But the idea of this background, it creates more of an interest, doesn't it? And that's why I've done this way around. So I've used the main colours, which are sort of subdued a little bit, slightly warm in places, a bit of burnt umber, a bit of burnt sienna sort of colours in there, and a warm brown with a touch of black in there as well. In other words, Payne's grey really, mixed with other colours. So I wanted sort of a warmish background, but subdued, kind of pushed back a little bit. You have to be careful with some backgrounds because sometimes the background can fight with the subjects. However, there are exceptions. For example, that's a really bright background as you can see, but it's mottled as well. But I wanted to give the impression of a warm, sunny environment and sort of cheer the painting up somewhat as well. That's why I went with this sort of bright yellowy green background, which it does work. Yes, I could have done it differently. I could have used more natural colours, but to be honest with you, I like it the way it is. It makes it stand out, doesn't it? But even though we're talking about blurry backgrounds, you could also go semi-detailed. Well, yes, it's blurry towards the top, in the furthest area away. All I've done is add just a hint of detail in the background, so we can see hints of reeds on the background bank. But it's still quite blurry. Even the water's fairly blurry other than the reflections, which I wanted to make sure that the water looked flat. So really this isn't just about technique, is it? It's also about creating the mood of the painting. And that applies to anything else which I've done, such as this Dik. I know, that's a funny name, but it's a lovely small antelope. But I wanted the background to be, well, subdued. I wanted it to be kind of pushed back a little bit. I didn't want the background to be too uniform. So one side I've gone darker, as you can see, and the other side I've gone lighter, just to kind of add a variety towards that background. But people's eyes will still be drawn to the animal because the background isn't too overpowering. If you want to paint a background which includes the environment of the subject, something like the sea turtle, you want that setting the scene, don't you? So something like this, I've used a wet in wet background all the way down. And whilst it's still damp, I used a damp clean brush to lift off a little bit of paint in places, just to remove that paint and create more of a sort of blurry, detailed feel. Well, sort of, isn't it? But it gives you the impression of sort of rocks or rough areas on the seabed, compared to when it goes higher up in the sea. So this is why then you would need like a semi-detailed background, by even getting a brush, loading it with paint, and then flicking that over the top of the damp paper. Now I normally paint a background first, and the reason for doing that is that I don't need to cut around the subject with the background colours. I don't want to risk getting the brush on the edge of the subject, then damaging all them fine details I put around the edge. So I always paint the subject last. Background first, then the subject. But stay tuned, I'm going to show you how to do some backgrounds very shortly. Materials. What I've got here is a block pad by Bockingford. It's a £140 cold pressed paper. And because it's glued all the way around, it just means that when you paint large wet and wet washes over the top of it, yes, it will still cockle, it will still bend and buckle, which it will, but it can normally dry fairly flat, apart from where you got that tiny gap at the very top, and the paper might just lift a little bit around there, but that's nothing, is it? It really isn't. Now, I mentioned that we've got the Dik. There we go. That's one of my recent paintings. Why did I choose that background? Well, when you look at the reference photograph, you can see the background is very similar to that anyway, isn't it? So I wanted to paint something with similar colours to to the one in that photograph. I've used a lighter background on one side. They're not quite the same colours, but it doesn't matter. You can use whatever colours you want to use for this, you really can. If you wanted something to complement the subject that a little bit more, then what you can do is use some of the colours you can see within the head and the neck, or whatever subject you're painting. So for example, I could go for warmer colours for the background if I wanted to. And I have got just a hint of warmer colours just dotting around you can see in places as you look around this background. So let's see if we can replicate this background now on screen for you, or something similar to it, using the same sort of colours. Let's give it a go, and I'll show you how I tend to apply the background paint onto that watercolour paper. I'm making some colours up here as you can see. Now when I painted this diptych for my members on Patreon, I'll tell you the background colours for this so you do know about it. I've used raw sienna on its own, and this is going to be a mixture of Payne's Grey and ultramarine violet. So I've got a little bit of ultramarine violet left in my half pans here. That sort of warms it a little bit, because Payne's Grey, yeah, it's a blue-black, isn't it really? And I want it slightly warmer than that. And you find this violet colour just adds that little bit extra to it and gives you, there's my scrap watercolour paper there, look, something like that. Rather than, if I use Payne's Grey on its own, you'll end up with something like this. A bit watery, I know, but I'll give you some ideas. So that's the difference really between Payne's Grey on its own, just a touch of ultramarine violet in there just to warm it slightly. When you're working on the background, always make up more than you think you'll need. Because there's nothing worse than running out of background colour while the paper's drying on you. Because it will. It will dry really quickly. Especially those corners. Making all of these mixes to a watery consistency. So, size 18 old synthetic from about 20 years ago, something like that. First thing I want to do is wet the background. And the reason why I do this is because I want the paint to blur, which I do. So using clean water, preferably, wet the background, allow it to soak into the paper, just for probably half a minute to a minute, something like that. As I mentioned earlier on, you start to see the corners drying normally first. My board's on that bit of an angle like that, and because of that, it's all running downhill. I tend to work on an angle because I find it easier on my back, and then do this 3 times. Once it's soaked in for the 3rd time, then we can start to apply the colours over the top. While this side's soaking in a little bit, I just wet this side and show you what it's like if I put the colours on straight away on a wet piece of paper with 1 layer of water on. You ready for this? Every like and subscribe I get will help my channel grow and hopefully show other arty folk like yourself on how to paint wildlife in watercolours. So I get some phthalo blue straight on there. You find, look at this, it's just running straight down the paper, and that's no good. Unless you want that effect. Yes, you can have some nice effects that way around. Or you can tilt the paper back and forth to send the water in different directions if you wanted to. And that's really good for skies. If you want to get a stormy sky, then you introduce a little bit of grey in there, something like that. That can work quite well for a stormy sky. A lot of my backgrounds tend to be sort of earthy tones, because normally it's wildlife which I tend to paint, not landscapes. So you find that everything just runs downhill, as you can see there, which means you can't control it that well. So what I tend to do, I let the water soak into the paper, as you know, that's still soaking in on that side. It's quite streaky, isn't it? And then you can control the paint on the paper because it's not too wet. It's wet, but not soaking wet. I can see the corners starting to dry already, so I better wash this brush out and then carry on. Better lift that off first. I know, terrible. If you wanted this sort of effect, great, it does work quite well. But, as you can see, I can't control that water without having to keep sort of pushing it back up the paper like that. That's just one way that you can do a blurry background, if you wanted to. I'll show you something else on that side in a bit as well. Just mop up with a semi-dry brush the bottom of that. Then what we'll do, we'll re-wet this area a couple more times, and then we'll add some paint over the top. I'm going to add this colour in, just around here. If it's too rich, we can just soften it down afterwards. Just use the same brush, of course. Make sure it's clean though. Keep washing that brush out. I have a double water pot here, so I can wash out in the dirty water first, and then give it a quick dry, and wash it again in some clean water. That's how I tend to clean my brushes. Now this is starting to dry, so you don't want to take too long doing that. But I'm going to go for a little bit of brown. That's the next sort of tone, isn't it, really? Just a touch of that in places, not everywhere. Just to warm certain areas up. We'll blend that in shortly. So you don't need much paint, do you? Not for this sort of size anyway. Look how the water's pooling up down there, though. Because there's too much water on the paper. This isn't running down the paper now, is it? Then we're going to go for sort of the violety grey colour. We'll start to add that in. But leaving gaps in between. That's all I'm doing. And this is a clip I'm showing you now whilst I was working on the background for painting this diptych. So you can see I'm using the same method, the same idea. It will look different. No background will turn out exactly the same. Not really. Depends how the paint flows, doesn't it? Once you've got these colours on, then you can start looking around and thinking, okay, I can do a bit more dark in that corner, maybe around there, and so on. Just work around the picture and see what you need to do to change it slightly more. Just make it varied as well. And once again, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as that reference photograph. It really doesn't, honestly. So once you've got these colours on, give that brush a quick rinse out. Give it a dry or semi-dry on some kitchen roll, like I'm doing here. Then you can start moving it around, starting with the lightest areas first of all, and softening those areas down. Because the paper's still wet, that just gives me the ability to move it around without getting any hard edges or cauliflower marks, as a lot of people call them. And you can see from the painting, that's what I've done there. That sort of idea. That's richer, but it doesn't matter. You can always soften it back if you wanted to, just to knock it back, lift some paint off while it's wet. A little tip as well, when you're working on a larger background, remember where you started adding the paint first of all. So if you're starting in this corner, you've not been back there for a while, you know that corner is starting to dry on you. So you need to go back there again and add some more paint there. Because if you don't, it'll be too dry to work on. And then you'll start getting those hard edges. Now when you dry a background, it depends to me, if you're working on a background which includes something like the diptych, or any subject in question, what I would normally do is use some masking fluid, like this one here from PPO, to mask off the subject first of all, just on the inside edge, so I can paint around it. And because the masking fluid is on the paper, I wouldn't dry the background, because sometimes that can harden the masking fluid, and then the masking fluid could possibly tear the paper when you try to remove it. So just worth just being patient and leave it to one side to dry, just for the sake of 2 or 3 hours, it's worth it. Once you've got the background on like that, all you then need to do is get some kitchen roll, preferably clean, or cleaner than that normally, and just tidy up the edges as well. You can see how this is still pulled up down there because there's too much water on the paper. Yes, it's quite effective for certain things, but for what I'm doing it for here, get out of the way, thank you. But for the method I'm using here, this is ideal. Now while that side's drying, I mentioned this side, I want to create more of a sort of effect like this one, okay? And all you would do, you get a brush, get some water, take most of it off, then lightly flick it whilst it's damp, not soaking wet, because it just blur. So just very lightly flick it like this. This is still damp, this paper, as you can see. And look at the effects already that's creating by just splattering some water on the paper. Yes, you can use salt, sea salt or table salt will do, and that will create some effects as well for you. But salt can take longer to dry. And that will give us some ideas how to do that. But it's also one of the methods which I use to create the foreground effect for the sea turtle. As you can see, that's dried nice and flat, other than, as I mentioned, a tiny little lift where that gap is at the very top. And that's how soft that background can look when you make sure that the water soaks into the paper before you apply those colours. And that works really well like that. And that's a lovely background, isn't it? This one's not too bad at all, actually. It does work quite well, having that really wet paper. It's literally dripping off the page. And it's still quite effective as well, isn't it? So when you're working with backgrounds, and as I mentioned, choosing the correct colours, you've really got to consider the environment that the subject is within. An example of the splatter technique is this one here. It's a hoopoo, and you can see all the splatter marks I've created within the background. Even something like this one here. It's only a short area, but it makes a difference. Can really bring the subject to the forefront, can't it? So choose your colours wisely. Either the colours within the subject itself, but muted down for background, or colours which are completely different to the subject in question. Now, if you do want to learn a little bit more about painting blurry backgrounds, I have a video here on YouTube for you to watch. Just that one there.